Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. So we are here tonight for the presentation of the downtown on-street parking study. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you. I will. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to try and go through it pretty quickly. I was told to try and keep it to 15, 20 minutes. Obviously, jump in whenever you want, but I'm going to move through. Geez, it was about a year ago when we started this. We had some stakeholder meetings, and this slide is really the talking points for the stakeholder meetings. Usually, this is the parking paradigm. If I'm called in, if you're calling a parking consultant, usually it means that you really you have enough, we call it a vibrant problem, vibrant city problem. You have enough growth that you really don't have free and convenient available parking for everybody in the downtown core. Usually, if you have enough demand, then for it to be free and convenient, maybe it's not available because by the time you go there, there's somebody else parked there. So the other option would be free and available, but it may be a couple of blocks away. You have to walk a little bit. It's not convenient. And then the third option is if you do want it to be convenient and available, usually some type of parking control needs to be put in place, so it's not free. It's either time restricted or metered. And so this was really the key talking point that we talked about. Not everybody enjoyed it or appreciated it, but I think everybody accepted it, and maybe grudgingly accepted it, but understood it. These are your existing conditions. I'm sure you're all aware of this. About 200 on-street meters plus 15 off-street in the lot at Lincoln and Cedar Street. The meters are very old and outdated. They're conventional parking meters. We really don't make a case anymore for replacing conventional meters with conventional meters. Those are meters that only accept coins. They're really piggy banks on poles. All they do is collect money. They do have a timer into it, but they're just independent units collecting coins. I'll talk about some of the newer features as we move along. You have 50 cents an hour as your rates, 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. Time limits vary from 1 to 4 hours. And in 2017, the meters generated about $38,000 in gross revenue, which mathematically is about 67 cents per space a day, which is considered low in the industry. That's because you have a lot of metered spaces, I assume, that are very underutilized, maybe not where people are parking. So when looking at the potential for replacing parking meters, I'm now going to go into what went into detail in the report, is our parking meter overview. We talk about smart parking meters. We would never recommend replacing a meter with a conventional meter because of these four keys. Smart meters accept credit cards. They can handle complex rate structures with demand-based pricing. They have enhanced and advanced audit control and maintenance capabilities because they're all networked, they're all computerized, they can communicate in real time. So you know when to collect them, you know when to maintain them. They provide remarkable reporting capabilities because of all this. And this is true of both multi-space and single-space meters. All multi-space meters are smart meters. Single-space meters are either conventional or new or smart meters, so that's what we're referring to. So this is a comparative analysis. Again, everyone knows, I think, how to handle a smart single-space parking meter, so I'm not going to talk a lot about that. It's a single-space parking meter, but it has these other features. It's communicating wirelessly. It's got a computer. You can take credit card, accept credit cards with this meter. They're easier to use. So generally, the public likes it. It's nice and easy. It's what we're used to. Everyone knows what to do when they see it. You don't need signage because the meter speaks for itself. When you have multi-space meters, you need signage on the block to tell people to pay for parking, because when they get out of their car, the meter is not necessarily going to be there. It's multi-space because one meter is covering multiple spaces. A big benefit for municipalities with multi-space meters is that because there's not a parking meter in every space, there's not going to be any time left on a meter. So that goes away. You know, when you come into a space and you're lucky enough to see that there's time on the meter from the previous person's time, that's not going to be there. That's called piggybacking. And that's a revenue enhancement. As I said, the meters are easier to collect and maintain because they're communicating. They also have larger coin vaults, so you don't need to collect coins as frequently, and also because they're taking credit cards, you won't have to collect coins as frequently. And they can be easier to force, and I'll talk about the different types of methods because they get enforced in different ways. And with multi-space meters, you don't necessarily need to define the parking spaces. Typically, more cars will fit on the street. and pay. So that is a revenue enhancement as well. So I'm going to talk about the different types of multi-space meters because we all know about single-space meters. There are three basic types: pay and display, pay by space, and pay by plate. Pay and display, customer or motorist walks up to the meter, pays for parking, and gets a receipt that they need to walk back to the car with. And they display the receipt on the dashboard, and enforcement is done by walking and verifying the time on these receipts. So it's visual manual enforcement by foot patrol. For pay by space, you have to assign a space number to every space. Usually old meter poles are used to do this. That's what is done in this picture. And then the motorist walks to the meter and enters the space number to pay for parking. And then enforcement downloads a report in real time when they're going to enforce that street of the paid and unpaid spaces. And so then they see an unpaid space. If there's a car in that space, they cite that car. And the third method is pay by plate or pay by license plate. This is where the customer would enter the license plate number in the meter, and enforcement is done via mobile or handheld license plate recognition. And so you have a picture there of the cameras on top of the patrol car, and there in the vehicle you can see the laptop open there with visual pictures of the vehicle and the license plate. The license plate data is converted into, license plate image is converted into readable data, so you can see that's there on the screen. And on the right hand, there is an Android handheld unit that will actually scan and read a license plate the same way the mobile LPR cameras do. And I typically recommend if a municipality wants multi-space meters, I usually recommend pay by license plate because of the benefits of mobile or handheld license plate recognition, particularly mobile license plate recognition. I do want to mention there's another feature, pay by cell phone, which is an amenity, a convenience for customers because they can bypass the meters completely. They don't need to go to the meter and pay. They pre-register for an account, and these are the steps for how they do that. And there's typically a convenience fee attached because it is a convenience. A lot of times this is a compromise for people who don't care to have to walk to the meter compared to the conventional meters that are right where their car is parked. So it's a nice feature, and it's a nice enhancement. So now we'll get back to the existing conditions here. This is your existing meter inventory, about 200 on-street meters plus 15 off-street that I believe are considered part of the supply. So it's 215 total meters, but 15 are off-street. And you see I've highlighted Lisbon Street because my understanding this is the busy street, Lisbon Street. There are only 12 meters on Lisbon Street. Most of it is not metered. It's just a time limit for 1 hour. And these are your unmetered spaces. Far more spaces downtown are unmetered, a total of 532. Again, 100 of them are on Lisbon Street.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
So for those unmetered spaces, you're not necessarily recommending that all of those spaces have a meter?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Nope, this was just, in order to determine that, I needed to go out
Total
and
number of
count all
spaces.
the spaces. Right. So this is just to give you an idea of what we determine, what you have, what your existing supply is. No, we're not. This is what we are recommending, but I do have to say this is Table 6 in your books, and we had several iterations, and this is not accurate. You can see the currently metered space, it says 193. It's actually 200, so I'm going to have to correct this, and we can reprint and resend you out updated reports with the accurate data in it. But it's close enough for this discussion. All of any numbers that we use when talking about expenses and revenue are all estimates anyway, so I'll refine that. But this gives you an idea of what we're talking about. We're talking about basically increasing by 50. We're talking about going from 200 to 250, not counting the 15 off-street. That's right here you can see the bulk of them are on Lisbon Street because this is your busier street. And then we move outward, and so we're just talking about what we understand to be your busiest spaces, busiest streets. So not all of the spaces on each of these streets. There were 100, I believe, on Lisbon Street. We're saying 83 because some of them are farther out in an area that we didn't find to be as busy. And basically we understand that meters are considered a revenue enhancement, but really meters are also to control parking. You want to keep parking turning over. And so that's why we look at the busiest streets when we consider where we want to meter, because the idea is to turn spaces over. The problem with a 1 hour time limit is it doesn't let anyone stay there for more than an hour, and there may be situations where people either want to or need to stay for more than an hour, and there may be space availability. So we generally recommend a paid space with a price that's high enough to keep the turnover going, but allows people the freedom to park there if they want to for a longer period, but they pay for it. That's the compromise to when you have this parking paradigm issue where there's not enough spaces for every space to be free, convenient, and available. So those were the recommendations. Now, if we're using multi-space meters, it would be about 35 meters. So there's the how many would be on each of the streets. Typically 1 to 2 per block face. And again, it's a convenience factor for people to walk. We want to make sure they're relatively close enough so that people can walk to them as they're leaving their car and going to their destination. This is where they would be mapped out on the city. Again, it's 35 of them. Those numbers are the number of spaces that each of the meters are controlling. Depending on which you do, if you went with pay-by-plate, someone could pay at any meter. Not just the ones that we say it's controlling, but those are how many spaces are left and right of each of those meters before you get to a street where they'd be crossing a street, where customers would be crossing a street. So there are a bunch of tables in your report about the revenue projections and costs and whatnot, but I do want to go through it quickly. This gives you an idea, and we try to be conservative with this. I'm recommending a $1 rate. 50 cents an hour is particularly low parking rate throughout the parking industry. When we do rate surveys, when I talk to my colleagues, we try not to do rate surveys comparing what parking cities are doing near yours, because what they're doing may also be particularly low. If somebody does a survey in Lewiston to determine the parking rate, it's going to be 50 cents an hour, and we think that that is a low rate. So that's why we don't like to do surveys, because what someone else is doing is not necessarily what would be recommended. Another reason, as I said, we do this, when we talk about this, is you have two things you have to do. You have to cover the costs of the program, but also you should be charging a fee that is going to have a result. And again, the result is to turn spaces over and to create a value, that there is a value for parking in the downtown core for any given period of time. So that's the rationale. The rates could be higher. We talked about demand-based pricing, where you charge a higher amount for the busiest area and then less as you go farther out. So again, it's that the paying for the privilege to park right in front of where you're going and to try and be fair and try and more evenly distribute the cars. But we don't recommend doing that, implementing that initially, because we really believe in data, and we really believe you need to start out evenly, and then you measure the data and look and see how much usage each of the meters are getting. And that's how you determine where people are parking most frequently. That's what I like about mobile license plate recognition, is it's going to give you all this data because it's going to tell you where everyone's parking. So we're recommending $1 an hour. Another reason we're recommending $1 an hour is that is a 100% increase. We're doubling the rate there, and we understand that the public not going to be happy about that. They're going to be a lot more unhappy if it's more than doubling the rate.
That would be the headline in the paper.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. But again, you know, the rates need to come up. So anyway, these are very conservative estimates to how many. You can see how many hours a day we think cars are going to be parking to come up with the revenue per day based on 250 days of paid parking a year, Monday to Friday. No holidays. Is that a question?
Yes. So is this, I'm on table 8, the revenue projections. Are we taking into account the fact that there will be transaction fees for credit cards? Because that's not something that we encounter day to day now, and I know there is a fee, at least upstairs.
Yeah, that should be on the table. I don't. We'll come to that table.
On one of the previous ones?
No. Coming up.
I just don't know what page. Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
2 hours are ahead of the game.
So anyway, so that's what we're assuming here would be 212 and change in revenue. And by the way, another update we have to make. It was an oversight on this. We determined multi-space meters. I told you don't show or leave time on the meter, and this is going to increase revenue. So that's probably another 5% with multi-space meters, or $10,000 that is probably going to be found because people typically pay for more time than they use. Not everybody, but 5%. So. 1 in 20. Yes?
And is that the number of hours, is that just counting daytime hours? That's not taking into the availability to do evening hours?
That's correct.
The possibility of?
That's correct. This is based on your existing conditions, which is 8 hours daytime parking, 8 to 5 or 8 to 4. 8:30 to 4:30, I'm sorry. It's based on 8 hours, right.
Right.
So again, we recommend sticking with your existing conditions to collect baseline data. It's hard for us to make a recommendation we don't like to make recommendations without data. We use the data that was provided based on your current meter payment history of where the busy times were and anecdotal evidence for non-metered spaces like Lisbon Street. So we recommend collecting the data and then determining if it makes sense to extend the hours. So for example, if you're doing mobile license plate recognition, those tours where you're driving around picking up license plate data, that could be done after hours, and then you're picking up the data without implementing before you implement the meters to be collecting at night.
Councilor Marker, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Councilor.
So the license plate metering, how does that work? I mean, how do the customers get billed? How do they?
The customers are walking up to the meter and entering their license plate, and they're paying with a coin or a credit card. It could be bills. We don't recommend bills, or they could use their cell phone and pay with a pre-registered account. It's the enforcement that is done with the mobile license plate recognition. That's why the customer needs to enter their license plate, because enforcement is being done via the license plate.
I see. Okay.
So the software tells the
They still have to go through a meter. I mean, they have to do either the meter or the phone, another app.
the customer either.
Because I guess I'm thinking more about the places where they pick up your, like in Boston now, you can't go through and pay anybody. You gotta have either the pass or they pick up your license plate and they'll bill you in the mail. That's the kind of thing I was thinking about. That's not what you're talking about.
No, that's what I'm talking about is pretty cutting edge. That's bleeding edge. That's like Easy Pass on the highway. And there are a couple of cities that are doing that right now, but primarily off-street. One or two maybe that right now that are doing that. It's a little complex, but the software is capable of doing that where you don't need to do anything. You have your credit card on file like you do with Easy Pass, and you receive a bill once a month for your parking. Theoretically, that's possible, but it's really not being done on street yet.
The other thing I've been exposed to is, and this was in Costa Rica, of all places, that you could reserve spaces online, right? And book those through your credit card. And then when people went there, they couldn't take, if it was during that period of time, they couldn't use that space. So is that the technology we have available to us as well?
It's not being done on-street in the United States. It's being done off-street. The challenge with it for on-street is protecting that space so that no one else parks there. It's easier in a garage to reserve spaces and to keep track of your supply. There is technology that you could put on the streets. It's cost prohibitive. You'd have to put a sensor in every space to know if the space is occupied or not, and you'd have to police it or enforce it in some fashion. So it's not something that we would recommend doing on-street. The on-street spaces are, it's pretty hard, I think, for the public to know whether or not, they could park in it if it's not gated or signed in some way. And it would be very temporary, so there'd be a lot of hurdles, I think. So this is a procurement budget, and again, this is with assuming pay-by-plate, so it does have an isolated component that you'll see for $18,000 for an LPR handheld enforcement unit, and that would be, that is scanning a license plate. But you can see these are different vendors. We actually reached out, per the city's request, we reached out to multiple vendors to get pricing. This pricing is now a year old. It could come up, it could go down, it could stay the same. But again, for the sake of these budgets, these were the prices. So you're looking at spending, the least expensive was $263,000 for 250 spaces with multi-space meters. and LPR and handheld enforcement units. This is the handheld unit, not the vehicle-mounted mobile unit. And so this is including other costs that are assumed in here are spare parts. You'd have to remove the poles that you have, your existing single-space poles. You might need some concrete pads if there's some areas where they are not able to put the meter on the existing sidewalk. And signage. You do need signage for these. And I'll go through these pretty quickly, again, because of time limitations. And there's a lot of different options here. This was the operating budget, including the revenue, which we saw at 212 and change. And Councilor Ray, you'll see here there is a line item for credit card processing fees, so we did budget that in.
I didn't realize what CC stood for.
Oh,
when
I'm sorry.
I read this the first time, sorry.
No, I should have spelled it out. That's my
No,
apology.
it was a long weekend.
Okay. So here are again, the different vendors, and you can see what the annual net would be from the different vendors. So $150,000, $160,000. And then this would be using smart single-space meters. A couple of things here. There's two major vendors that we spoke to. IPS, you see IPS, NCPA. That was they have a contract, a national account where you can get discounted pricing, but not if you go to RFP. They're trying to keep you from bidding competitively. And those prices were significantly lower. And my opinion on this is that the pricing that they have, the higher pricing IPS has, that's high pricing, I think. I think if you go to RFP, they are going to come down. I think they're trying to talk me or you into not going out to bid, because that, you can see quite a difference in the pricing. The McKay pricing is much lower. The reason the McKay pricing is much lower is because McKay offers 1 meter, it's a multi-space meter more or less. They offer 1 meter that can control 2 spaces. You have 1 pole with 2 meter heads on it. Well, they offer 1 meter that will control right and left spaces. So that reduces their costs. So that's why theirs are the least costly of the single space. And then the operating budget for the single space, $160,000, $170,000. And then we looked at Lisbon Street only. We understand that you have a limited budget, and so while I was giving you the overall view of downtown, this would be Lisbon Street only, which looks to me to be the busy street that is not currently being controlled with meters. So we looked at 83 spaces on Lisbon Street, and these are your costs there. Again, the IPS and the McKay. This is the single space because we just had the single space, multi-space. So I went to single space here. It cost about $85,000 is most expensive, but only $45,000 for McKay. And then the operating budget, $73,000. Yes?
The operating budgets that you're presenting does not include a debt service. So when we're looking at the net total,
No, these I did not include.
that's not net
Debt
net.
service. That's correct.
Okay. Because, no, we'd have to somehow amortize the original upfront cost.
Yes. Since I have to redo this anyway, I could incorporate debt service into that.
Okay.
Okay. And the multi-space meter procurement budget, Lisbon Street, 83 spaces only. These are the various vendors. And then the revenue, a little bit less than the single space net revenue. Although you do need to add the 5%, so that brings it to about a wash, which again I'd like to put in. So this is the comparative summary of the options. And that's my last slide, so here for questions or discussion.
So before I forget, one thing to add to your list of updates to make to this lovely report was when you talk in the beginning about the public hearing that we held You make reference to only one counselor being present, and there were actually 3 counselors there, and the mayor at the time.
My apologies.
So I just think it's important to include so that people know that the council's paying attention.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Other questions? Counselor Pettingill?
Tonight, you didn't talk, or with the software for these, are remote updates available to happen, and at what frequency can they happen if the software can handle that, as far as pricing, if we determine that it's too low or too high to feed that demand?
Yes, the meters can handle complex rate structures, and they can be done remotely. So you could change the rates from a laptop at any time, or you can schedule them to change. They could change at different times of day,
Okay.
different days of the week.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Ed?
Could you spend just a minute sharing your analysis, thoughts, what you saw in regard to our parking garages?
Yes, yes. We were asked to also look at the parking garages while I was here and while we were doing this study. The parking garages need attention. They need more attention. I understand there's some issues with the technology, with the gates, so I was asked to look at gated systems. And there are gated systems also using license plate recognition cameras that could be incorporated using fixed cameras at the entrances and exits that would track the license plates of the vehicles as they go in and out. So basically, you'd be enforcing it the way you would enforce on street. It would be a citation if someone failed to pay, and basically you would be incorporating the same technology to the garages. So that could handle the equipment. That would make it a lot easier. It would increase the throughput of getting people in and out of the garages without having to stop at the gate. And again, I understand a lot of issues with the controls right now for the gates. You could also upgrade, a new gated system obviously would work better. I understand you're having a lot of service issues. But again, that would be more costly. It's a more economical upgrade if you remove the gates and replace them with cameras. The garages have some challenging wayfinding. Some of the garages are better than others, but the signage is not real great for first-time parkers. I guess, monthly parkers probably know their way around it. I understand, I think almost 90% of the parkers are monthly parkers. But, if you're raising the on-street rates, that's one of the goals of doing that is to push cars into the garage, particularly longer time parkers. If you're going to expand your metered program, you might be taking spaces that right now that are, some of them may be uncontrolled. Employees may be parking there when they're working. So the idea is to offer longer-term parking in the garages. Actually, not about the condition of the garages, but about the philosophy of parking with the garages. Ideally, your garages would be less expensive to park than on-street spaces. Our American society has had it backwards for a long time because the on-street spaces were there when they created the roadways, but they had to spend money to build the garages and pay down debt service. So that's why garages are usually higher priced. But based on supply and demand, everyone wants to park on the street. Everyone wants to park where they're going. And they're not going to the garage, they're going somewhere on the street. So the newer philosophy is to flip that around, charge more on street, and get people to go into the garages for longer time periods. So again, I didn't want to create too much of a shock with your parking, so I'm not recommending going higher than $1 an hour initially. But that would be the ultimate goal, would be to look at those prices in comparison. I was recommending, right now you offer up to 59 minutes free in the garage, so I was recommending extending that up to 2 hours to create an alternative for people, since I am recommending doubling the on-street rate. So this would create a free alternative for 1 or 2 hours of parking. And since right now 90% of your parkers are monthlies in your garages, I don't think it hurts your bottom line. There may be additional parkers moving into the garage and not paying, but they're not parking in the garage they're now and paying, so it's not really that you're going to see a great loss in revenue. I think the revenue will be made up on street, and it will improve the turnover and create more vibrancy downtown for people to be able to park on street for the 1 and 2 hours.
And what's your analysis of our parking charge system in garages?
The system right now, well, it needs repair.
I'm talking about what we charge,
Oh, the rates?
the rates.
You have a $6 max, I believe, in the garage. That's a good rate. That's a reasonable rate. But again, your on-street is below market.
Right, but I guess what I'm getting at is Southern Gateway, where we don't even need a garage, we
Oh, I'm
charge the
sorry,
same
yes.
there as we charge in
Yes.
garages that have high demand.
Yes, I understand. I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying now. Yes, your garages are all uniform, and they should not be. It should be based on, again, it should be based on supply-demand. Just as I'm recommending metering your busier streets, not not where you have no demand, I think that the garages that are closer, that have more demand, should be netting or charging a higher price, demanding a higher price. And by lowering the prices at garages where people are not inclined to park right now, when it's a level playing, when it's all even, that you provide that option to people that, okay, if I'm willing to walk, then I can pay less and walk a little bit. But people who are willing to pay more to park where the demand is. So the same philosophy on street should be done on street, and you can do that with your different garages. But I do if you already have the data, you know the knowledge, then so be it, you should do it. I think it's great to have the data and collect the data. Garages provide that data. Payment data gives you that, so you already do have that data in your garages.
We should have that data. We actually, at the moment, do not. The data that we're getting out of our garage system is corrupted and inadequate. If I want to know how many spaces I have in a garage at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to have somebody drive through the garage and see how many cars are in it.
Right. Yeah, actually, I did do some analysis on the garages, but the data.
You did those drive-throughs?
No, well, I did the drive-throughs, but I tried to create some data, and I did have recommendations in the report about charging different amounts of the different garages based on demand. But I didn't have good demand data, so I pulled that from the report.
And our monthly rates, I think, were low.
Pardon me?
Our monthly rates were low.
Monthly rates are $52, Heather? $55 per month, regardless of which garage.
Okay.
Yeah, those rates are low as well compared to the daily fee.
Right.
Usually it would be from 12 to 16 days of parking for a monthly.
Right, it was like 6 days or something, I think.
Yeah.
Other questions on the council? Yeah.
So why is the data so bad? Wouldn't it be recording every time someone either uses their card to go into a garage or press?
One would
I want
certainly
this on
think so.
public record, though.
Part of the problem is that when the gate system isn't working, then you lose track of who's coming in and out. So that means that periodically you do have to go through and adjust your actual counts and clear out the bad data and put in good data. That's become less of a problem recently because we made some other changes that mean we have fewer instances where we have gates that have to just be lifted. I don't know what the rest of the problem is. We've been trying to get data processing to spend more time with the software to try to clear it up. We've had some confusion in the past. There was a period of time where if we're working on one garage, we authorize monthly parkers to park in the other garage, and sometimes that data doesn't get cleared out. I can't tell you why we can't do it. All I can tell you is we can't do it. It's incredibly frustrating from the point of view of trying to say, we get a call and say, well, Saunderville garage is almost full. We go over there and drive through, and the top level of the deck is empty. We get another call that says Lincoln Street has 450 people parking in it. No, it doesn't. Go over and look. So we're trying to straighten that out, and hopefully we will at some point. But the software system and the whole gate system is old, clunky, and inflexible.
And what department in this, in City Hall is managing that right now?
To be quite honest, no department in the City Hall manages the system. We have multiple departments that do parts of it. MIS handles, obviously, working with the computerized system. Our building maintenance people take care of building issues in them. Finance takes care of issuing monthly permits and trying to collect money and doing those kinds of things. The police department.
We're constantly called, the people are basically being held hostage in the
Oh, yeah,
parking lot, and they
I've been
can't
there.
get out. They call 911, and even they have a button to press and doesn't work, and daily we get calls, and it's usually right around when people are getting out of work around 5 o'clock. We can be assured that we're going to be called to try to get people out of these parking garages because the gates just never
Yeah,
work.
police department takes care of, obviously, enforcement. So, I mean, I've tried to make, well, I've told you before that this is something that we don't understand. We don't do this. Municipalities aren't great at running parking systems. There are experts who do that. And the responsibility, nobody wants to be responsible for the parking garages because it's something that they're not comfortable with. And so the responsibility has shifted around in various places in the organization. And the emphasis over time has been to operate the garage system as inexpensively as possible. And we have a inexpensive operating system. And if you ask the users, they'll say, yeah, we have an inexpensive operating system. It shows in how the garages are operated and managed.
Yes, it was beyond the scope of the project, but I did also make a recommendation that you consider speaking to a professional parking operator. They could oversee and manage both the on-street and the off-street program. They have that expertise. That's what they do. With that, they'd maintain them better. They'd be in better condition. But you would need, again, the program needs to sustain itself, and that's another reason that we talk about raising rates, is to support the system, because it has not been supported properly. The meters need to be replaced, the garage equipment needs to be replaced. So, you need to create revenue to sustain the program, and that ultimately should be put back into the program so that the garages are cleaner and better lit and better signed for wayfinding. And the same with the street. A lot of cities are doing that with streetscape, improving the looks and spending that money, putting that money into lighting, safety, security.
Councilor Marcotte?
As the administrator knows, I'm not in favor of hiring out a vendor to handle our garages. But hearing some of the discussion tonight, I would be interested in knowing the age of the equipment that's being used, why the gate lifts aren't working, has it fully been depreciated, and what it would cost for a new system. Because maybe that's what we need, is a 21st century system if what's in there is really old and not functioning because it's antiquated, as opposed to it just simply being abused, and a new system might have the same problem. So I'd like that information before moving forward with any idea on hiring out a vendor.
Well, some of that information I may have, but some of it I may not, and we could talk about additional services.
That's probably more
Well,
for
we
the
can, we
Administrator can
can
probably
gather
call it.
that data in-house.
Councilor Lyson?
Thank you. You're recommending an hourly rate of $1 for all meters in all locations. At the Build Maine conference, they had a presentation that documented that where you're not getting the turnover where you need to, is that you can raise those rates in order to generate that. And I'm wondering why you didn't go in that direction.
Because I don't think you have enough reliable data to defend or justify doing so. So what I'm recommending is metering the spaces that, based on the data you do have, are the anecdotal data and data from collections of your coin-operated meters of where the busy streets are. But, for example, Lisbon Street is, I understand, one of your busiest streets, and yet most of it is not metered. So I don't think you have enough reliable data to justify doing that. So what I'm recommending is starting out with $1 an hour on the 250 spaces that I believe are reasonable demand spaces, and then using the mobile LPR or stationary handheld LPR system to collect the data and your payment data, and then you'll see which spots are. Take 6 months or whatever, if you want to go a year to go through 4 seasons, and then you'll actually have data, defendable, justifiable data, and then you can make that informed decision on which spaces are in high demand and should be higher, and which are in low demand and should be lower. So that the idea is to try and create a space for everybody. Again, people willing to pay more and people who were willing to walk more.
Is there an accepted algorithm in that equation? Because it would seem to be something that would be complicated with an equation. And is that, like I said, is there an algorithm that can be applied, or is that something that?
Well, the ultimate goal is an open space on every street.
Yeah.
And so what we say is that that's about 85% occupancy, typically, is what we say, and that's what the goal is. And there are vendors who do, software providers that have algorithms that will analyze your data and spit that out and tell you what it is. Another philosophy is the Goldilocks method, where you raise the price and lower the price and see what happens in 3 months, and just keep adjusting it until you get to that. We have an open space on every street, and so that's when it's just right. So it's kind of trial and error.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the council? So typically, we don't allow public comment during workshops. Oh, and we won't tonight either. So that concludes,
We did,
was a public hearing.
we did indicate this would be a workshop
Oh,
in which
okay.
the
Okay.
public would be invited to speak, because we wanted to get reactions to the report.
Nobody told the mayor. So if you want to step to the podium and just give us your name and your address, and everyone will be given 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Allison Jacobs. I actually live in Auburn, but I am the controller for a law firm on Lisbon Street. And I guess I have a couple of questions. One is there any evidence to show that if you start charging $1 per hour for the spaces on Lisbon Street, that this may slow down the growth? I know we've been promoting trying to build up Lisbon Street and get people coming back downtown. And there are some businesses like ours, where I'm with Berman and Simmons, people are going to come to see us anyway, but are they going to come down to that restaurant if they have to pay $1 an hour when they could go to a restaurant somewhere else and have free parking? So I'm just curious if there's any evidence to show that it may slow down and the businesses may slow down on Lisbon Street. And then my other concern is, I'm not positive, but I think we are one of the largest employers using Centerville Plaza. And I would like to say that if the rates are going up, I certainly hope the condition of the garage goes up exponentially. They're poorly lighted, they're creepy, they're dirty. The gates, we have so many problems with the gates. In the winter, the garage gets full because they close off levels 4 and 5. Then when they do open them, because of the snow and the freezing and the runoff, it's very dangerous going up and down those ramps. They're not maintained. So I would just like to say that being a large employer downtown, I certainly hope that if the rates are raised, that the conditions of the garages will go up as well, because right now they're not very good. And the police has me on record many, many times calling them about different instances in the garage. And if we do go that way, I think the license plate recognition would help with some of the problems that I've reported. We have some little ones here, so I won't go into it, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, no, yes, no.
Michael Dostey, J. Dostey Jewelers for Lisbon Street. So today, you've just gone over your findings. Were you planning on going through your recommendations to the city tonight? Yes.
Right, to answer?
Yeah, that's.
Please.
Right, well, I thought I did. My recommendation is to meter a total of 250 spaces, so it would move the meters around as I showed, and raise the rate to $1 an hour and enforce with mobile license plate recognition.
So, aside from the headache for Public Works, what would be the major reason for recommending multi-space meters versus single-space meters when it appears from this slide that capital costs and excuse me, my site's terrible, recovery of capital is so much more attractive for single-space meters?
Well, the recovery of the capital cost, that's to recover the capital cost. That's a one-time thing. After it's paid for, as I said, the multi-space meters actually are a revenue enhancement, maybe 5%, because they don't leave any time on the meter. But most of the benefits are in maintaining the system and running the system, because you have fewer meters to maintain, fewer meters to maintain, to repair, to collect. But also, the biggest benefit to me is the data collection of mobile license plate recognition.
And you obviously took into account a community that has had no meters whatsoever for several decades, and then moving to a kiosk-based system or a multi-space meter system. Have there been other communities that have gone through that dramatic a change?
Yes, many cities are making these changes.
From 0 meters to multi-space meters?
Yes, and also many making them from 0 meters to smart single-space meters. Both types have very strong market shares. And I didn't answer, there was a question from the previous speaker which ties into this about that. There is no data that shows that people are not willing to park and to pay for parking and go to a store or a restaurant. I can't give you exact numbers, but you all know. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of cities throughout the country that charge for parking, including Lewiston. You charge for parking here. It's a big concern of retailers that people won't come if they have to pay the parking meter, but it has not been borne out. I believe there are 2 instances that we are aware of cities that implemented a new meter system and removed them in modern time, and there are probably 1,000 that did not.
I mean, thank you. As a downtown business owner, again, aside from the monumental headaches that single-space meters would cause for public works and snow removal and snow maintenance, I would strongly encourage the council to consider when implementing meters on Lisbon Street and downtown streets, single-space meters versus multi-space meters, simply because we've got a culture of several decades of no meters, and then putting in a kiosk-style meter or a multi-space meter where there wouldn't necessarily be signage or something indicating on every single space. I guess that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Keith Tannenbaum. I own the Vault at 84 Lisbon Street. I would like to echo both of what my previous speakers said. One, I park in the Park Street garage, and I think it's most days rather offensive if you walk through there, so I would love to see that improved. The other question that I had, and I've brought this up, I know, a couple of times to others already, you mentioned that the plan involved Monday through Friday only, and as someone who owns a retail business that's open on Saturdays, I find that most of lower, at least the block of Lisbon Street that I'm on, is often filled with residents that park there all weekend long, and Saturday, coming downtown to shop is almost impossible to find a free parking space, at least on Lisbon Street, and I would say that is the number one concern raised to me by my customers, is that they just can never find parking on Lisbon Street. And I think a large part of that is because I think part of it is enforcement, which I know is very difficult, but I also know that on Saturdays in particular, the people who live there, it's a lot quicker just to park on the street in front of your apartment building than it is to park in the garage, even if you've paid for the garage.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Kimberly Craig, 216 East Avenue, and even though I don't have a business downtown, I have 2 spaces further away that I think I have to monitor every single day. And so I know the difficulties that all the businesses have downtown. So I read your entire report, which you haven't
Thank
talked
you.
about. So that's my points with this, is, well, for one thing, for weekends, I think that probably if you pay for a space, would you be able to move from place to place? You know, if you pay for your time and be able to move from one point of Lisbon Street to another point, to another restaurant, to another bar, can you do that? In some places, you can pay for a time limit, but you might only be there for like 15, 20 minutes and keep going. So I was just wondering about that. So the other thing is about the accountability and the fines for people. I know one of your recommendations was to allow somebody to not have to pay for maybe their first offense, but then pay for the second offense. Now, if you're a person who's had a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, those fines should go up because you're taking advantage of it and parking in front of people's businesses for days on end because you know that you're not going to be fined. That would definitely take care of that accountability. And also sorry, I get so nervous. The harassment of the officers would also, I think, would improve. I've watched the ladies previously get harassed on a daily basis, and now Officer Stone, who does it with a smile on his face every day, and that accountability of having that time ticket, I think, would help them a lot. So,
Thank you.
Well, just to answer the,
Yes, first question, that'd be great.
yeah, answer your first question. The technology can do that. When you're paying by license plate, your credential is your license plate, so you're moving that with you. That's a municipal decision as to whether or not you want to give that benefit, but the technology does allow that ticket. I paid for an hour, well, it's driving with me for an hour. You could do, you can authorize that if you want.
Is that just for multi-space, or would it work with single-space meters too?
It does not work with single space.
Doesn't work with single-space.
Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth Eames. I live at 133 Lisbon Street. Since you said it, it's just been on my mind. I didn't understand the $1 an hour decision you made. You said you didn't poll nearby, and I wasn't sure what you meant by that, why you didn't poll nearby. Seems like that would make more sense. So it seemed just totally pulled out of thin air, and I'm just curious how you came up with it. That was what was on my mind. Everything else that everyone said, yes, yes, and yes. And Centerville, oh my God, please fix it.
Well, What I meant was, when I said poll, I meant we didn't conduct a rate survey. And the reason we do conduct rate surveys if, I'm sorry.
So you didn't conduct a rate survey at all, though? It wasn't like you did a rate survey like in this neighborhood, but not in this neighborhood? Because I think that was part of your question. So you didn't do one at all, though, I guess is...
Right. A rate survey was not part of the scope. And the reason I did not recommend putting a rate survey into the scope is because, and typically when you do a rate survey, you try to do one of two things: comparable cities and usually neighboring cities, because people want to know, well, what are they doing over here? What are they doing over there? However, what they're doing over here or over there may not be beneficial. It may not be what we would recommend. So that's why we don't typically do rate surveys or recommend doing rate surveys. We do them if we're asked to do them. And my point was, in other words, I'm saying that based on your the characteristics and your rates, 50 cents is low. And so if someone is doing a rate survey, it's going to look there, and they do it with Lewiston, it's only 50 cents. So that's what I'm saying. That's a low rate. And when I recommend it to $1, it has to do with I do look at your existing conditions. Your existing conditions were 50 cents on street and $1 an hour, $6 max off street. So that's where I got to the $1 to match the garage rates. Ideally, garage rates should be lower than on-street rates. But I don't recommend just coming in and changing everything. I think things need to be gradual.
Other questions or comments? So next steps, Ed.
Well, the next steps obviously is we're going to have to give some thought to which of these options we would like to pursue. We have some money. Heather, how much money or Dennis, do you recall how much money we still have in?
The exact dollar amount, not off the top of my head, but I want to say was around 75,000, somewhere in that range.
So we theoretically have existing funds that can be used to at least partially, start the implementation process, as was suggested perhaps with Lisbon Street. Alternatively, we could look at doing something more significant, which would require us finding a way to fund the remainder of the project. So I'm gonna suggest we probably ought to come back to you folks with a couple of implementation scenarios, so that you can take a look at it and decide. Obviously, we'll need to decide between single space metering and multi-space metering. I think that's one of the big decisions that'll have to be made. Then how much we want to do right now versus phased in over time.
Councilor Ray.
Where is that $75,000 coming from?
We borrowed some money 2 years ago.
Okay.
To replace, it was borrowed to replace our meters.
Thank you.
The original project was strictly for meters. It didn't include looking at parking garages on street, just an upgrading of the meters. As we got into it, recognized that this is much larger than just upgrading. We're not just going to upgrade technology. So that was born from the idea to go ahead and move for a study first to understand what are the options and what's the best recommendations moving forward. Overall, parking management.
Yeah, we didn't want to just buy new old-fashioned meters. I don't think we could even do that anymore, probably, could we?
You can still find them.
Do they work?
I think the ones we have now, we used to have a lot more meters downtown. So when some of them were taken out, we saved them all, and as the current ones are breaking, we've been using parts from the old ones, and I think the next step is probably eBay.
Bad episode of Hoarders.
Councilor Marcotte.
What was the original amount of the borrowing?
75,000, wasn't it, Heather? Was it higher?
Okay, because I heard that that's what was remaining. Did the study come from this?
Correct.
Yes.
It did. So I may be off on the number. I think the better thing for us to do is get the original dollar amount and then.
The original and what's been expended in it.
Correct.
and
That's
where
what
it's
this
at
was.
now.
Yep.
And the other question I had is, on table 17, having a little difficulty reconciling the recovery of capital timeframes.
So can I just ask a question of Ed while we're waiting? So in terms of the parking garages, whether or not we do anything in terms of pricing or gating or any of those things, it sounds like we need to be paying more attention to like other issues in terms of like cleanliness and maybe more regularly scheduled maintenance of those things. And I know that some of those things are things that, you know, are in the budget, but some of those things sound like just sort of general maintenance stuff, and I'm wondering if we need to have a conversation about that.
Oh, we can certainly have a conversation about it, because what the people are telling you is absolutely the case.
Right. So maybe we could work on fixing that stuff.
There are a whole set, there's a whole set of issues surrounding the parking garages that are difficult for us to deal with because of the fact that they're open 24 hours a day, which means we don't have people around. So you have people who hang out in them, people who live in them. We've had to purchase porta potties for several of them, and so on and so forth. So it's a real problem.
And I mean, I think as we have the conversation about, you know, whether or not we're hiring somebody to manage that, what the costs are associated with us doing that in-house as well, because that should play into, you know, whether or not it's cost-effective for us to hire a third party to do this.
We can put some of that information together for you. Some of the issues that run in there are, when we hire people, we, number one, have, as you know, a very high benefit cost associated with it. And B, a lot of the issues can come up outside of normal working hours. So you end up with on-call / overtime types of issues to deal with them. We can certainly put together some estimates of what it would take to do a better job. We should also probably, at least in a couple of the garages, I think Somerville is probably the best example. It's the oldest of our garages. We should probably have some additional capital expenditures to deal with things like security cameras and lighting. We've been doing some of that. We have managed to get more cameras in our parking garages, but we don't have them everywhere. So I think there's stuff like that that would certainly help.
Great. Councilor Lyson?
Yes, thank you. I think it might be opportune time to, make those improvements as we integrate a new parking system as well. I mean, so people have seen some benefit from it. I mean, obviously, we're going to be replacing the meters or whatever. People can see that investment. But, as long as I think if people think, no one likes to pay any money they don't have to, but as long as they think it's fair and equitable, I think the people will accept it here. And I think if they see also some improvements of people who are parking long-term, or if we're like lowering the price of entry, let's say, the competitive price of the garage versus the on-street, that people might say, yeah, it makes sense to go down there and walk there a little bit. Probably better for their health as well.
And there is one benefit built into this proposal, which is going to 2 hours free in the garage. We do hear from people, particularly restaurants and things like that on Lisbon Street, that the hour isn't long enough for people to, get out, go to the restaurant, eat, have a nice meal, and then get back. So that's one immediate benefit that's being provided if we would adopt the proposal.
Right. Thank you.
Councilor Marcotte?
To follow up on some of that, currently our parking garages are losing a ton of money, and we do capital improvements every year. Not a whole lot, but that adds to the debt service, and that number still remains quite high. I've been monitoring it for 10 years. That's why initially I did not like the idea of hiring an outside vendor to manage, and especially when I saw the $173,000 number, I assumed that it was a management fee, that it didn't include any sort of employees for maintenance, et cetera. It wasn't too long ago that we did have a couple of employees out of Public Works whose responsibility was the parking garages, but those were eliminated some time ago. So I really need to make sure that there's a cost and benefit analysis made with respect to whether we hire somebody on the outside or do it internally. I understand that we have a benefits package that might be considered Cadillac compared to an outside vendor. But, no, we are currently, and I really don't like the idea of the 2 hours of free parking. I think it wasn't too many meetings ago when I mentioned I had to use a parking garage during the weekend, during a snowstorm, and it was free. I would have been willing to pay. And so expanding hours into the week, into the evening or the weekends, I think benefits Lewiston that it's not a loss leader of an item.
Just, I think the 173,000 we're using for a outside parking management firm would include them hiring, so that wouldn't be just 100% management fee? That would include them hiring personnel?
I'd want to see all of the details.
Where are we on that?
That's in the new program.
Yeah,
I don't know anything about that.
Table 17.
Yeah.
Well, Table 17 needs to be corrected. That was different than this one, I'm sorry. The Table 6 and 17 need to be revised. There are some cell errors in Table 17 as well. But I'm sorry, the 173,000, that's not me.
No, it's not.
Are you all set with table 17?
We're going to do some corrections.
Okay. Counselor Rick?
One thought that has occurred to me, how is this, if it is at all applicable to our accessible parking spots on street? You know, it's great if it's cheaper to park in the garage, but some folks don't have as much mobility, and just wondering how this might differ for those spots.
For ADA parking? The meters are ADA compliant.
Okay.
Both the MSMs, the multi-space and the single space?
Yes. You need to make sure you stipulate that they can be. They're designed to be. Multi-space meter manufacturers design them to be. You need to make sure that you stipulate that. Actually, I need to make sure that I stipulate that because I'm writing your spec when you make this decision. That's part of my scope was to give you the spec. Single-space meter manufacturers, it's depending on the pole height. That's what makes a single-space meter ADA compliant, pole height. Different cities do different things, and actually the whole industry the whole country is moving away towards, it used to be free parking with an ADA placard. A lot of municipalities still do that. Every code is different, but most are moving away from that and simply relaxing the time limits for ADA parking. What's important to consider if you're having ADA spaces, if you have ADA spaces signed or striped, regardless of whether there's a meter there, is that there's also curb cuts there for the space to be compliant. It's very challenging to be, ADA spaces are needed on street, but it's very challenging for the drivers on street. So yeah, that will be in the specification. That's up to you on what you do about the requirement to pay the meter or any time limit or time difference.
Other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our workshop.